Well, the media fascinated with the twists and turns in the Petraeus sex scandal. But instead of obsessing over the general's personal sex life, should people be more concerned about how this all became public? Well, we know about the affair thanks to an FBI investigation, which agents sifted through thousands of emails between Petraeus and his mistress, Paula Broadwell. But Broadwell is certainly not alone. Google's semi-annual transparency report shows that the number of government requests for user information has skyrocketed. Take a look. In the first 6 months of 2012, Google says it's received more than 20,000 requests. Nearly 8,000 of them were from the U.S., and 90% of them were fulfilled. Well, now that the Petraeus story has exploded, is the real story the government's ease and desire to snoop on people's online activity, even when there's no crime being committed? To discuss, Himanshu Nigam, founder of SSP Blue, joins us now. Hi, Himu. So what do you think? Is the media missing the big story here?
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me. Well, I think what you're seeing in action is the balance of users' and citizens' right to privacy with the right of the government to investigate an online crime. And that ultimately is what you're seeing playing out. Unfortunately, it's playing out on national television with General Petraeus and the issues that have come across his way. But that, from a citizen at-home perspective, is what's actually happening.
Do you think it took a big scandal like this from one of our top military leaders in order for people to really realize the extent to which surveillance goes on?
Right. Well, sometimes it does take something very politically connected to get mainstream attention. No doubt this has done that. But overall, what I think citizens are perhaps surprised about is the fact that the FBI can do these things. But ultimately, if you step back and look at it, the government has been conducting investigations like they always do. They chase after the footprints. They chase after the evidence that somebody may have been left behind, whether that's in the physical world or it's in the online world. And in this case, what you are seeing is the emails that were coming from Ms. Broadwell going to our victim in this story, as people have been talking about it, were coming from an internet-related email account, and therefore the FBI, as part of their normal course of investigating any crime, are looking and saying, where is that email coming from? Who owns that email? Who might be behind it? Where are they located? And one piece after another goes into a file and then gets examined to figure out who's doing this.
And a report that Google released in a quest to be transparent, kind of the numbers there really illustrate how common it is. We see Google's transparency report. The U.S. is leading in the number of requests. I want to pull this graph up here. We see that government requests have increased exponentially over the years, and since 2004, the demand to snoop on emails and other internet activity, you see, rises dramatically. So what do you think about that, that the U.S. is really on the forefront of this compared to other countries, especially when we really tout that we have free speech here?
Well, I think there's no question that in America we do have free speech, which is a great thing. I was actually inside of Microsoft back in 2004 working on criminal investigations with law enforcement and doing exactly what Google is doing in this situation, which is complying with a legal request. I think what you're seeing is when you have an internet-connected society, which the United States is, then much like the physical world, a lot of the crime has moved into the online environment. And what the government has started doing is focusing more on the online connections to physical world crimes. And even if you step back and look at what's happening in the criminal society, you're seeing organized crime getting involved. You're seeing identity theft going from the physical side to the online side. You're seeing fraud occurring. And because the U.S. government has been working closely with private sector, such as Google and Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, all the major internet companies of the world, as well as of the United States, you will see more investigations taking place online. So I'm not surprised by the numbers. They actually make a lot of sense. And I think if you look at the numbers around the world over the past 10 years and going forward in the next 5 or 10 years, the more connected a society becomes, the more broadband penetration, faster internet access, the more others in the criminal element will start using it.
Right, that absolutely does make sense. The more that people conduct their lives online, which is what we're seeing, the more that all facets are going to to spread on the internet, use crime or, you know,
exactly.
crime can be committed on the internet too, as we're seeing. But because of this, Himu, do you think that it's easier now for the government to be able to spy and obtain information since it all is stored in cyberspace?
Well, you know what's really interesting about this is, and I think in society, most people are not aware of this. There's a thing, and the technical, fancy legal word is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, what we often call in our industry ECPA. And there's laws that govern the government's ability to get to know who somebody is, where they are, and what they're doing online. And when Google receives a request, or Microsoft, AOL, Yahoo, any internet company out there, that request needs to comply with the legal requirements of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. The FBI has been very well trained by the Justice Department prosecutors, and I was one of those prosecutors, on exactly how to make those requests. The private sector has systems in place to balance the user's privacy on their own networks and sites with the government's right to investigate. So what you're going to actually see is and on top of that, there's a judicial system that's built around it that says, wait, before you can get the contents of somebody's email, you need to get a search warrant, for example, which means the judicial system, a magistrate will have to sign off on it and say, that's okay, you did what you were supposed to in conducting this investigation, you did it properly. And then the system inside a company like Google will do something similar and say, well, let me just double check that before I disclose it, because after all, I do care about the privacy of our users, and let's make sure that happened. And I think in that report that you were showing the graphic of, that's exactly when Google says that they've disclosed on 90% of the situations. What that means is there were incidents there where there was a checks and balance in progress that was working, balancing the right to privacy with the right to investigate.
But we are seeing that a lot of these searches are conducted without a search warrant.
Well, I think it's easy to use the word search, and I think a lot of people do. They say the search was conducted, but
or without a warrant.
Right. When we think of searches, they can happen in a situation where there's a warrant and the government goes and gets a warrant. There could also be a reason why there's, for example, an emergency where a government needs to go into something because there's impending death or impending bodily harm and I know I'm being redundant, but that could happen, which in essence means it's impending, it's urgent, the government has to obtain information, and that information may help stop a crime or stop something horrible from happening. And so there are incidences that you will find where there was no warrant, but a search was still actually under the law, and ECPA accounts for this, was allowed. Now, is it a search to say who is somebody and subscriber information? And that's a subpoena is required for that. There are certain emails that have been sitting around and are no longer considered private by the law, and that's where a court order may be allowed. So there's different levels of legal process, but at the end of the day, what it's doing is it's balancing the two rights we talked about and doing it under a judicial system that when you walk into court and you haven't done it right, the first thing that's going to happen, there'll be a motion to prevent the introduction of that evidence. And so if you're the FBI, you're not going to get your person anywhere, so you have to follow the law.
Really interesting, Himo. We are out of time. It's interesting that it takes a big sex scandal to spark people's or to make it public that to the extent to which this really does happen. Thanks so much for coming on the show. That was Himanshu Nigam, founder of SSP Blue.
Thanks a lot.